Well, hello everybody. It is Black Mountain Talks with you, and this is Lena. And today I'm joined by everyone's favorite weapons inspector, Scott Ritter, and our regular co-host, Mike Mihajlovic. And I have something to show you. I have this book. Oh, I think my virtual background is playing tricks on me, but I have a Russian version too. Oh, it wouldn't work this way, but you can see it here. And I have a challenge coin. And it looks like this. I am a rich one today. So
and a t-shirt. And a t-shirt.
Yeah, and a t-shirt too. So I'm in full arms, I'd say. So today we have a very rich day. It is like a day full of events, and I even don't know what to start with because everything is so interesting. But I think we will start with the summit, which takes place in Munich now. It's World Security Summit, and Zelensky is there, and Navalny's widow is there too, by accident or not by accident. It's hard to tell. Well, I think this summit would be interesting because from what I have managed to hear, Germany is about to grant Ukraine 15 billion euro like help to enhance the military. And what do you think? What will it lead Ukraine to after all?
Are you asking me or Mike?
Well, you're first, Scott. You're captain never talked before a major, so you're first.
Well, it's the first time I've ever had rank pulled that way. I'm normally the one told to shut up. But let's answer it this way. Right now in Avdiivka, the Ukrainian army is being slaughtered. The fact is they're being slaughtered everywhere on the front line. Ask the platoon commander, company commander, or just a soldier, is the German money going to help you? I mean, what happens if, okay, Germany gives Ukraine the money? Does that change the fact that you're going to die in the next 24 hours? Nope. It doesn't change anything. Ukraine is a militarily defeated nation. Almost every bit of assistance that people can provide, the only immediate assistance is cash, and the cash would be used to underwrite a bankrupt Ukrainian society, government. It would pay salaries. It would it would allow pensions to be paid. It would, maybe help buy fuel to keep, buses running, things of that nature, cash. But cash doesn't change the outcome on the battlefield. The only thing that changes the outcome on the battlefield are weapons and trained soldiers. Europe right now is incapable of providing significant quantities of on-hand weapons. They've already done that, and those weapons have been destroyed. The troops that were trained to operate the weapons that were provided but have now been destroyed are dead, wounded, captured, or otherwise incapacitated. So Ukraine is in need of new troops who are trained. Training takes time. So even if you have the time, you don't have the troops. How is Ukraine recruiting right now? Their recruitment, primarily consists of going around and kidnapping people off the streets. A, that's not a very cost-efficient way of doing it. And B, the troops that they're getting aren't motivated. And C, they're rushed to the front lines. I mean, I think the average training time is just a little bit more than a week, where they are given uniforms, they're given a weapon, they're shown how to throw a grenade, and that's it. Then they go to the front line where they die very quickly because they don't know how to fight. And they're being put in a situation where Ukraine has lost all ability to support soldiers on the front line. They're out of ammunition artillery-wise, so they're rationing the remaining ammunition, which means they can't carry out effective counter-battery work, which means that the Russians are dominating the field with their artillery supremacy. The drones that Ukraine were pushing forward, the Russians have found the counter to. They have a very effective counter-drone strategy, which involves killing the operator of the drone. And so perhaps one of the most dangerous jobs in Ukraine right now is drone operator, because the second you log in, tune on, operate the drone, the Russians are hunting for you. And when they find you, they kill you. They drop a bomb on your head. They put a missile there. You're dead. So Ukraine's lost its ability to influence the battlefield with firepower. They can't maneuver because A, most of their tanks have been destroyed. Their armored vehicles they have yet, once they move, they're detected and attacked. So they're stuck in a static position now, which allows Russia to isolate them, destroy them, move on. The reason why I bring this up is that's the reality. Nothing Germany's going to do is going to change this reality. In fact, nothing anybody's going to do can change this reality. The only way you change this reality is if you can magically make 250,000 well-trained, well-equipped, well-led troops appear on the battlefield. And you can't. So this Munich Security Conference it's for domestic political consumption. It's a way of Zelensky continuing to confuse the Ukrainian people into believing that the West is there to help them. The West isn't. I hope most Ukrainians understand that not only are we not going to help you, we don't like you. We don't like Ukrainians. If we did, we would never allow this to happen to them. You don't allow 500,000 soldiers to be slaughtered. You don't allow, gosh, what's it up to 10, 20 million people to be permanently displaced from their homes. You don't allow the dismemberment of a nation that's a friend to you. We're not friends of Ukraine. We're using Ukraine. Ukraine is a tool to be used and then discarded. And what Ukraine doesn't understand is that they are in the discarded phase of our relationship. We've used you as much as we can. You're done. It's going to cost us more to replenish you than we're going to get out of it. So you're being shown the exit door. But this is a politically sensitive topic right now because NATO and the West, the collective West, has said that a Russian victory in Ukraine is of an existential threat to Europe, and now they have to explain to their people why it really isn't an existential threat. And you see how confused they are. Jan Stoltenberg one day, the Russians are going to invade. The next day, this is not an imminent threat. I'm trying to imitate Stoltenberg. I'm doing a very poor job. This is why my wife tells me never use foreign accents. But my point is, it's total schizophrenia throughout Europe, where one day they're talking about the imminent nature. You got the British talking about we're going to have to mobilize the entire country to go to war against the Russians. We have to prepare our society. You have a German admiral talking about people need to hoard water, batteries, radios, and things of this nature. And then you have others saying that's not we don't view the Russians as an immediate threat. What's happening in Ukraine can probably be limited to Ukraine. Maybe the Russians might move on, but we don't see any evidence of the Russians. They're going to invade tomorrow, but we don't see any evidence of trying. Heckle and jibe. It's schizophrenic, and that's what this Munich summit is. It's a joke. It's not serious. The tragedy is that Ukrainians who might otherwise say, "Hey, the game's up. It's time to cut our losses and move on," are going to be fooled into giving that last extra measure, which is going to cost a lot of Ukrainian soldiers their lives, and it's going to bring nothing but tragedy to millions of Ukrainian civilians.
Okay. Mike?
Absolutely agree with you, Scott, because it's clear. Munich Security Conference is a bit of farce, political farce, entertainment for the political elite so that they can gather in one place, do some speeches, pledge some help to Ukraine, and the overall result of the conference will be nothing. Just a lot of talks and it happened a few days after the famous Carlson Putin interview, and it's happening now in Navalny. Navalny is dead. So nothing more than pure political farce, entertainment for the masses and for the supporters. Regarding to money that Germany pledged to Ukraine, as Scott said, it will be just used to put patches on the pensions, those salaries for the employees, buy some fuels. Certain amount will disappear, evaporate. Money in Ukraine has that physical ability to disappear, to evaporate in open space, and it will fill some bank accounts. The soldier on the front line will get nothing of that, not even a tap on the shoulder. they will still continue to die for basically for nothing. And if they're not registered, if they are missing or taken prisoners, their families will get nothing. So it is tragic. It is sad, very, very sad situation what is now going on in Ukraine. Country is living on borrowed time. And no matter how much money is pledged, how much money will be laundered to Ukraine, situation is not going to improve for the ordinary man, unfortunately, ordinary people. So it's really sad. It's really sad. The biggest countries in Europe, beautiful country, very nice people, is melting. It's like as ice in the spring. It's simply melting, and they can only thank that to their leadership, because leadership is corrupted. Leadership stole so much help that they received. Western politicians, they pledged support as long as it takes. Yeah, so the money laundering will continue as long as it takes, because corporations and banks, they need to make a profit. War without profit is nothing. And Ukrainians are used. They're used and abused because it's Ukrainian blood, Western money. And there are limits. So now, how much Ukraine is going to hold, how much they can resist, time will tell. But Ukraine now is it was before living on borrowed time. So I don't see that anything is going to improve. And it talks about peace, real peace without Russia is meaningless. And this is a really one big political farce, basically throwing the dust into the eyes, trying really to channel something from the real problems. And Europe is in really big problem.
And here, regarding the Ukraine, I have one more follow-up question about the appointment of Sirsky. Does it have any, I don't know, practical meaning to change Zaluzhny to Sirsky? Because as far as I know, Sirsky was referred to as a General 200, and 200 in Russian and in ex-USSR slang, it means like that. So he was responsible for like port of Debaltseve, and he was responsible for a failed counteroffensive in the Zaporozhye region. So, and now he's suddenly appointed like instead of Zaluzhny. Does it have, will it change anything, or can it influence at least something? Or it is like, I read in one Telegram channel today that Sirsky's appointment has only one practical goal, is to make Ukraine like sign peace treaty with Russia. I'm not sure if they are correct, but that Joker DPR, they sometimes have spot on. So I am asking the question which I have read from them.
Well, I'll give you my quick assessment of it. Let's understand when Zaluzhny was the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, he represented a political challenge, a risk to Zelensky. One of the reasons why Zelensky has canceled elections is that he would lose the elections. One of the people he would lose the elections to is General Zaluzhny, who was looking like he was posturing to throw his hat into the ring. So Zelensky needed him gone. And you saw Zaluzhny starting to do things that normally a general doesn't do. Because remember, in a democracy, and we've all been told that Ukraine is the greatest functioning democracy in the history of the world, and it's not. But in a democracy, civil military relations is very important, meaning that the civilian leader is the commander in chief. And when the civilian leader tells a military person to do something, as long as it's a lawful order, the military person has no choice but to salute and execute that order. And the military officer's job is never to undermine civilian authority. And so we had a situation where, there's been tension between Zaluzhny and Zelensky all along. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. You can go back and read the media reports that go back to the summer of 2022, and you saw tension there. Zaluzhny, had a vision, had a plan, and it wasn't getting executed the way he wanted it to be executed. And so there was frustration there. At that time, there was a corrupt minister of defense who later, I guess, resigned under controversy and fled to the United Kingdom as the ambassador. But you know, there was controversy going on there. But we saw this come to light when this past fall, I think Zaluzhny gave an interview where he described the situation on the battlefield as a stalemate. He said it's a frozen conflict. And this was at a time when Zelensky was trying to convince the world to continue funding the Ukrainian enterprise, funded to accomplish a mission that Zelensky said was about pushing Russia back to its, 1991 borders, and things of that nature. Sort of a aggressive, offensive-oriented posture in keeping with the one that Zelensky bought into back in March, April of 2022, when Boris Johnson flew and scuttled the Istanbul peace treaty or peace agreement. And so Zelensky couldn't accept this, and he came straight out and said, "No, I don't agree. It's not a frozen conflict. We're counterattacking. We're going to achieve our goals and objectives." So you have this big split right there, which was becoming politicized. So Zaluzhny was making more and more noise about how he could do a better job as president than Zelensky. So Zelensky fired him, tried to at least, called him in, said, "I want you to resign." Now, again, in normal civil military relations, the only answer that a general gives is, "Yes, sir," submits his resignation, walks away. Zaluzhny said, "No, you got a problem right there, a big problem." And Zaluzhny was backed up by the generals, including Sirsky, the commander of the ground forces, who said, "We don't want Zaluzhny gone." So now Zelensky has a problem. If he insists on firing Zaluzhny, and Zaluzhny at that time telegraphed certain things, like he met with a member of the right sector who is in the military, gave him a medal, and posed behind a photograph of Bandera and the right sector flag in their background. It's a signal saying, "Hey, Zelensky, remember those guys that said, Yarosh, and the right sector guys who said they're going to hang you by the neck until dead if you don't do what they want you to do? Yep, they're my friends, and we're coming for you. Try and fire me. Try and fire me and see what happens." Well, Victoria Nuland flies into Kiev in a panic. She has to restore the situation because the entire enterprise goes to hell in a handbasket if Ukraine, the greatest democracy in the history of the world, suddenly becomes a military junta. We're against coups, but not in Ukraine. But I mean, we didn't want a coup. We had to bring it down. So she goes in there and she settles the situation. And the situation requires Zaluzhny to accept the, being retired or pushed aside. And Sirsky, Zaluzhny's man, by the way, it's not as though there's this division between Zaluzhny and Sirsky. Sirsky's Zaluzhny's man, and Sirsky is brought in charge. That's to the military, telling the military, Zelensky's not going to interfere with your work anymore. We understand that you don't want him to interfere with your work. So it is a huge blow against Zelensky to have Sirsky brought in. Now, Sirsky, remember, Zaluzhny said it's a static war and all this stuff. Everybody's like, it's the butcher. He's going to come in. He's going to lead dramatic counterattacks, offenses there. A couple of days later, he said, we're transitioning into a general defensive posture. Exactly what Zaluzhny wanted to do. So Zelensky got nothing out of this except that he continues to pretend that he's the president of Ukraine. But the reality is, and this is my interpretation, the generals have taken over. It's a coup d'etat and everything but acknowledging it, because the generals stood up to Zelensky, told him no. Nuland came in and played a little political game, but the generals are in charge, and they're in charge of the war effort. And Zelensky now is a supporting actor. That's what I believe is what's going on in Ukraine. It's an assessment. I can't sit here and tell you that I have absolute knowledge. It's just an observation.
Yeah, it's a big political game there, and Zaluzhny is very popular, or let's say popular among the military staff in Ukraine. So, and also that picture, the famous picture with right sector leader Bandera in the background and the flag. Yeah, that was the clear message. They are behind Zaluzhny. So any harm to Zaluzhny, any trying to kick out Zaluzhny on the way that maybe Zelensky wanted to do will backfire. So Zaluzhny is also a professional soldier, and but he didn't really lead every single operation or planning. So that's the reason why there is his staff, his deputies. So among one of them was Sirsky. Sirsky was not a typical deputy, but Sirsky took responsibility for the ground operations, to planning strategies and operational moves. But also we have to emphasize that not only Ukrainian generals, there are NATO generals, retired or active NATO generals, which are acting as a shadow general staff, shadow HQ that provide advices, meaning that they're in my opinion, they're in control. So regarding to Ukrainian high commands, yeah, they will continue to do the stuff. Generals took over. U.S. Representative Victoria Nuland, who messed up all of that stuff since 2014, flew to Kiev to threaten President Putin, and also, but the main reason was actually try to somehow to iron that relationship between Zelensky and Zaluzhny, so that at least it looked like functional government, like a symbiosis between the political leadership and the military leadership. But there is a deep wedge between them. Zaluzhny now, I think that I saw somewhere he joined to Poroshenko's party. So he is now opposition, definitely opposition to Zelensky. And one day, if that even might happen, free elections. So it will be something that people who are going to that elections will have to decide. In the meantime, who knows what is going to happen? Generals are trying to basically to save the situation. Stalemate, they're talking about stalemate on the front, no more large offensives like last spring. Well, there is offensives, limited offensives, but on many directions performed by Russians. So Russia is grinding them. Russia is simply slowly but steady grinding Ukrainian army on the front line. They're attacking deep inside the Ukrainian rear, striking the assembly areas, striking the warehouses, distribution network, so inflicting sometimes much heavier casualties in the rear, 30, 40, 50, 60 kilometers from the front line, then on the front line. So what Ukrainian generals led by Sirsky can do, they have to try to stabilize the front line, to maybe turn on to some kind of stalemate, but they will not. Bear in mind, Sirsky is a Soviet school. He studied, he's ethnic Russian, born in Russia. He studied on the Soviet Military Academy. So he is fighting according to the stuff that he learned when he was in the Soviet army. You know, it's hard to change opinion once when you are educated in one school of warfare. So regarding to tactical decisions and operational decisions, yeah, it will be mistakes. There's certain reasons why they're calling him butcher of Bakhmut or Debaltseve. So yeah, there were heavy casualties there. But also Sirsky won a couple of local engagements. I think it was around Kharkov during that Ukrainian offensive. So he's competent general. He's competent general, but many on the right sector will consider him as a traitor because he's Russian. He's ethnic Russian, and now we will get into that political and ethnic division between Ukrainian people from the Western Ukraine and people from the Eastern Ukraine. And if somebody who is not Ukrainian at all now is the chief for the whole Ukrainian army, that will create further divisions and further hate between opposite parties. They will try to do whatever they can. I mean, for them, Avivka is lost. They will try to maybe to deploy them. That's one of the reasons why they try to send the 3rd Brigade, Azov, Nazi. So they try to send them to. There are some talks I read about that that it's actually Sirsky is pushing Nazis, neo-Nazis, to the slaughterhouse, so to get rid of them. Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, it's very hard now to have a firm information about it, because the battlefield is fluid. Obviously, he will continue whatever is necessary to try to save the situation, no matter his nationality. He is still a commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army. Time will tell in the next few years whatever happened, whatever is left of Ukraine. Was he the one who works for Russians or not? Many of the investors in Ukraine, many of those right-wingers, hard right-wingers, will always accuse him for any defeat, because they need to have a scapegoat. They need to have somebody to blame. And they will blame anybody except themselves. So time will tell. Simply wait on the best of our knowledge. We can only guess what may happen. But the time is not working for Ukraine this moment. They may have expensive watches, but Russia is the one that has the time. All time that they need to finish the special military operation.
Yeah, that's true. And by the logic of the events, well, I think it is obvious to many people that Russia is interested in this conflict going at a slow pace, because they grind Ukrainian troops, and they drag all the juices out of the West too, because West is going thin too, with all the economic problems and so on. And yes, I have read today, I have read the reports about Azov being stuck in Avdiivka, and they just got annihilated there, according to the reports which I read in the morning. And I wanted also to ask about Zaporozhye direction, because Marat Khairulin, he is a war journalist, he writes that there is significant presence of Russian troops in that region. Maybe you can comment on that direction a bit. And where do you think the next, I think it's not if, it is when the Ukrainians leave Avdiivka, where the next stronghold they will take? Will it be Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration or some other places? Maybe Scott, you could tell us about that, and then Mike.
I mean, you got to put yourself in the seat of a Russian military commander, sitting in Rostov, to answer that question. I think the Russians. Well, I think what I'm comfortable in saying is that there's sufficient evidence to believe that the Russians have amassed called exploitation forces in the Zaporizhzhia area and up north in the Kupiansk area. That the media has talked about that, about the existence of 20, 30, 40,000 troops in each grouping, sufficient armor, sufficient resources. And these troops exist to exploit developing situations. And so I think, that's what we can expect. We can expect pressure to be put on the Zaporizhzhia front. And when we say pressure on Zaporizhzhia, we're talking about creating a dilemma for the Ukrainians, because if the Russians can break through, the Ukrainians now have to be worried about pivoting north towards Kharkiv at a time when Kupiansk is being developed, or pivoting south towards Odessa. Either way, it's going to require the Ukrainians to commit reserves, and that's the stage where we're not in the end game where Russia is going to do the big arrow to Berlin. What we're in the game is the Russians continue to develop the battlefield to their benefit. The Russians aren't going to, I believe, sacrifice troops frivolously. War is hell, and the Russians are capable of carrying out very aggressive operations when required, and those operations oftentimes result in significant casualties for the Russian side. But the Russians, I don't think they like their generals to be nicknamed Butcher. Their generals are actually, concerned about casualties because political leaders are concerned about casualties, because the Russian people are concerned about casualties. So I don't see the Russians do anything precipitous. I think what's happening now is that the Russians know that the Ukrainians are starved. They're starved for ammunition. They're starved for technical capabilities, armor. They're starved for manpower. And what the Russians are going to do is continue that starvation diet. They're going to keep pushing the Ukrainians, because what happens when you put troops, when you commit troops to a sector of the battlefield, the Ukrainians have to respond. That means, especially when you're in ammunition starvation mode, that they're going to have to take ammunition that's been stored up in other areas for emergencies and divert them to that region to respond, because that's the emergency now. And now they're even more starved up here. And then the Russians will put pressure there and put pressure there, put pressure there. I liken this to, again, historical analogies always sound good, but you got to be careful of them. But, you know, people should go back and look at what's called the Destruction of Army Group Center in Russia in 1944, the summer of 1944. The same thing happened. The Germans had a defensive line. They had there was sufficient troops. They had limited reserves, though, and limited artillery ammunition. And when the Russians started to attack, the Russians would put pressure on a specific front, forcing the Germans to commit their armor reserves to that point and their artillery. And while they achieved in blunting that attack, when the Russians pushed in this other area, they didn't have sufficient reserves to blunt that. They had to strip forces from elsewhere. And now you have thinning of the line. And then the Russians put pressure on the thinning of the line, and that line collapses. The Russians now push into the deep area, threatening these units to start to withdraw. They put more pressure. The withdrawal becomes a rout. And next, you know, the entire front collapsed. And I think that's the direction the Russians are going. They're going to put so much pressure on the Ukrainian front that the Ukrainians are just going to run out of resources. And when you run out of resources, you run out of the ability to resist, and it will be the collapse of the front. And that's what the Russians are pushing for. They're not going to artificially push. I mean, they're not going to try and do, for instance, if we go back in history in 1943, the Russians made some deep penetrations. Everybody looked up Popov's tank army and what happened to it. It penetrated deeply in the aftermath of the Stalingrad battles in the vicinity of the Kharkov region, and was cut off by German counterattacking forces and destroyed. The Russians don't want to do that. The Ukrainians, no matter what you think about them, have professional soldiers. Sirsky's a professional general, and they have sufficient reserves that if the Russians give them the opportunity, they can maneuver, pinch off, and kill a lot of Russians. So I don't think the Russians want to give the Ukrainians that opportunity. They want to grind them down, take control of the tempo of the battlefield. Mass troops here, forcing reserves to come in, grind those down. Mass here, what's left goes there, grind them down. Mass here, there's nothing there now. Push through, collapse. And I think that's what we're seeing. I talked to both senior military and civilian people on my last trip. And I mean, I'm not giving away a secret because they told me, but they said that they're confident that there will be major developments on the military side of this conflict by May, meaning that what we think is happening on the battlefield by May, it's going to be something totally different, dramatically different. And if you take a look at how the Ukrainian forces are being worn down, how they have nothing left, what happens when Avdiivka falls? There will be a huge gap there. The Ukrainians are going to have to bring in reserves. From where? Zaporizhia, but there's 40,000 Russian troops there. From Kupiansk, there's another 40,000 troops there that are ready to attack. So they're going to have to take them from another front. And then the Russians will push there. And I think what these people were telling me is that you will see a complete redrawing of the military map by May. And then they said that they look at strategic defeat of Ukraine by September. So when Mike said earlier, talking about, this war could drag on for years, and that and Lena, you said that the Russians are patient. Yes, they are patient. They're not going to let the calendar dictate outcomes, but the Russians are looking at a different calendar. It's a far more optimistic calendar. It's a calendar that is predicated on the total collapse of Ukraine militarily and politically sometime by the fall. I concur. I mean, unless something dramatic happens, because even if the U.S. Congress releases the $64 billion, it's not going to change the reality as we see. The vast majority of that money gets invested back in, as they've bragged, back into the military-industrial complex of the United States to replenish the stocks we've already sent. So Ukraine gets no benefit from this whatsoever. 60% of that money, Ukraine gets no benefit. It comes back to replenishing what we've lost. The stuff that Ukraine gets is new production, which takes a long time. It's not like it's ready to go. We have to actually get the production lines up and running. We have to let the contracts. We might have to hire people, train people. And the output is not going to come off for months, if not years. And when I say months, I mean beyond September. So the Russians are looking at a calendar that says if we keep pushing and we keep grinding away and we don't let up, this thing's over. It doesn't matter. $64 billion. The United States could say, we're going to give you $1 trillion. Give them $1 trillion. Go ahead. It doesn't matter, because there won't be anything to receive that $1 trillion come September. Again, this is a very optimistic point of view, a very optimistic projection. But if you take a look at what's happening on the ground right now, it's manifesting itself. Total collapse in Avdiivka. Mike, you can say you disagree with me, but I would respect that. But I mean, what I'm seeing right now is total collapse. The Russians are literally just having their way. This battle is over. And then what happens after that, there's not another Avdiivka out there. There's not another place in Ukraine that's been fortified, heavily fortified since 2014. It doesn't exist. What does exist is some trenches in the ground, some concrete, although the Ukrainians ran out of money. So a lot of it doesn't have the dragon's teeth now. They've got some mines, they've got some stuff, but no troops to man it, no depth. And that's it. So once Avdiivka falls, you even saw a couple Ukrainian commenters say that when this happens, the Russians will not only punch a hole in the Ukrainian lines, but they'll have the ability now to push their logistics forward to be more efficient in terms of supporting the flow of logistics, parallel to the front for more efficient operations. So we're seeing the kind of transformation of the battle that these people were telling me back in January taking place right now.
Yeah, it is attrition, simply war of attrition. Actions, operations, limited operations on multiple directions, pinning down Ukrainian troops there, so that they can only guess where the next Russian offensive will be, so that they can try to allocate reserves, which are very limited. And also reserves, to move reserves, it's not just put them in the trucks and ship them there. They need logistics to do that. They need the fuel, they need the ammo. So that stuff need to be concentrated somewhere. Russian intelligence is working so good that they know exactly where they're moving. So as soon as they make a stop for coffee, let's say that, they will get bombs, rockets, missiles. So it simply is going to rain down them. And once when the material reserves, so fuel and ammo, it's not available in a sufficient quantity to supply larger units, rank brigade and higher. So what they can do, they can transfer few battalions. In this, battalion can keep a portion of the front, but that battalion needs supplies. That battalion need ammo. They need the fuel. That battalion need support. So hitting staging locations, hitting the warehouses, hitting the air bases is something that Russia is doing all the time, and that is actually grinding Ukrainian military from behind. On the front line, Russia has an absolute dominance with artillery. So 10 Russian grenades, Ukraine can maybe respond with 1, and they're exploiting that. So simply troops, Ukrainian troops, nobody's objecting with their courage, their bravery. Yeah, they're brave troops, brave people. But when somebody is exposed to 1,000 shells per day, there is just a certain time how long that person can hold. It will be mental breakdown. Regarding to Avdiivka, yeah, this is the lost case. They will try to evacuate whoever was there. I read somewhere it was about 2,000 people. So it is regiment size of troops. So, but position is lost. And that, as Scott mentioned, 2014, they started to fortify that area since 2014 because this is operational jumping board toward Donetsk. So that area is closest one. That area was used for artillery strikes on Donetsk, on civil population. So once when that position is lost, and it will be lost in the next few days, what else? There is no fortified area such as Avdiivka or Bakhmut anymore. So they have Kramatorsk, Slavyansk. Yeah, but what they can do, expel people from there, try to make makeshift positions and use those cities as anchoring points connected with the line of trenches. But Ukraine doesn't have people to man all of that line, and they don't know where next Russian strike will follow. I'm leaning that it will be maybe limited, very, very limited attacks on both northern Kupiansk area and also on Zaporozhye, because it will create a pressure to Ukrainians what to do with their reserves, and to have operational strategic reserve. Operational and strategic reserve, they need to allocate a lot of material resources. They need to first. We will talk about tanks moving, Leopards, M1s, Challengers moving on the front line. Those tanks, they're very good fighting platforms, but they are logistically very. They need a lot of logistics to be invested in them. So they need to have a repair basis, supply lines. All of that stuff need to function flawlessly to mount some kind of successful defense. And as I mentioned previously, Russia is going to hit those supply bases. They are going to hit supply depots. So that is something that is going to hurt. I don't think it will be big pushes World War II styles like in the form of the Blitzkrieg. It will be simply attrition on the local levels, grinding whoever come, whichever unit they can muster to put it on the front line. And also, I want to emphasize that Ukraine lost the core of professional soldiers that were available in 2022. So that professional military, professional army suffered heavy casualties, 200, 300 missing in action. Then they start to mobilize people from the street. You can't make a soldier in a week. You can make a soldier in a month. You can teach him to get dressed, to fire a gun, to throw the grenade, and that's it. How those soldiers are going to protect assign a trench line or portion of the front? To make a professional soldier, they need to invest time. They don't have time to do that. There are training grounds in Germany, Spain, Netherlands, whatever. They just trying to almost like stamping those troops in a few weeks. It is not going to work in that way. It simply doesn't work. And without proper troops, as Scott mentioned, 250,000 people they need to have available, trained troop, equipped properly. They had it in 2022, a little bit less than that, but that army is gone, and no amount of money coming from the West. Let's say, 60% will be returned to the U.S. military investment complex. 10 to 50% will finish in the private pockets. So everything else may come to Ukraine and will be distributed. So if they get 5% to pay disabilities or whatever, that will be that's all. So money is not something that can win the war. People are the one that can win the war, and Ukraine is struggling with that stuff. You can't make a soldier if you grab somebody from the street, put him into the minivan, dress him, shift him to the front. It will become gross 200 or 300 within a days. or weeks at most. Of course, they have those nationalistic units, far-right units. Yeah, they're not even getting into their political goals, but they're competent, they're capable units. But there's so many, they can't do anything. There is not too many of them, simply. And then some of them simply now see that there is a bigger enemy sitting in Kiev than on the other side of the front line. People getting delusional, people getting disappointed. So it simply doesn't work for Ukraine. Russia is not going to risk their troops. They're going to use all firepower available, and there is a lot of firepower. They're not going to run out of ammunition, or fuel, or supplies. And any place that they want to attack on the front line, they will attack. They will attack where Ukrainians are trying to fortify, because that is the way how they're going to inflict the casualties. Full demilitarization of Ukrainian military. So destroying the equipment, destroying the manpower, and on the long term, it is simply going to have a much harder effect that we can even suppose think that now. But again, time will tell, and hopefully that this war will finish sooner than later.
Yeah, and I had like one question to Scott. It's a very quick question, and it's dedicated most to the chat people who are members of the Scott Ritter's chat, and it's linked to the only one official Scott Ritter's Telegram channel. So if you are watching this, please subscribe. There is only one official Scott Ritter on Telegram. Rest are the fake channels. And there are some people who are like panicking and asking, oh, now the West is going to give lots of money to the Ukraine. And you have already said that this money isn't going to change anything. And there was also a group of like commenters who were like, oh, you predicted that war in the Ukraine will be like over in autumn 2023 and so on. But well, I just wanted you to tell people that it is NATO who is backing the Ukraine. So without NATO support, it would have already been over.
Well, I mean, I think we know that the war's gone through phases. When Russia started the special military operation, the goal and objective was not the destruction of the Ukrainian army, but to put stress on Ukraine politically to get them to a negotiating table to bring a rapid end to the war by confronting them with the inevitability of military defeat. Russia succeeded. I mean, Ukraine has done a tremendous job in information warfare and exploiting Russian tactical mistakes, some Russian operational mistakes. Russia went too fast, too soon, didn't cover their flanks. The Ukrainians are skilled troops trained in NATO-style ambushes. And there was plenty of video images of destroyed Russian columns, dead Russian soldiers, and things of that nature. What they didn't show is that Russia kept advancing, and where the Ukrainians stood and fought, they died. That's just the reality. And Russia destroyed much of that Ukrainian army, put them in a very difficult situation. But again, the goal wasn't to occupy all of Ukraine. We now know that actually the goal was to give the land back. That the peace treaty said, look, we'll withdraw. In fact, as a good faith measure, Russia withdrew from Kiev, from Sumy. They withdrew half of their forces out of the Kharkov area. They were preparing to withdraw everybody had Ukraine accepted. That's the first phase. We'll call it a military victory for Russia, a political defeat, because Russia, as Vladimir Putin has admitted, was somewhat naive in believing that people would actually want peace instead of suicide. But no, the United States and the collective West put pressure on, through Boris Johnson, put pressure on the Ukrainians to turn down the best offer they were ever going to get. Yeah. And as a result, the United States then went into the new Lend-Lease. You remember $48 billion? And we went in there and we rebuilt a Ukrainian army that had been effectively neutered by Russia, by that initial operation. The Ukrainians suffered a lot of casualties in that first phase. Everybody focuses on dead Russian soldiers. The Ukrainians suffered far more casualties than the Russians did. But with $48 billion, the Ukrainians were able to rebuild a military capacity. A lot of their shock units were NATO-style mercenary units. A lot of Polish, a lot of British, a lot of Americans, a lot of French, and a lot of Ukrainians who were in the backup role. They took advantage of the thinning of the Russian lines in Kharkov to launch this counteroffensive that seized territory. Russia made a decision. We're not going to die for a piece of land. We understand what happened here. We were betrayed by the negotiators, and we were naive. And so, yep, guess what? We got to withdraw. We're going to fall back on defensive positions, give up territory, but we're not going to sacrifice our army. Meanwhile, Ukraine is taking casualties. That 48 billion got ground down again. The Russians mobilized 300,000. We go into a new phase of war. It's positional attrition warfare while both sides rebuild depleted military capacity. Russia, 300,000 mobilized, but they also were getting significant volunteers because something happened that nobody in the West thought would happen. The Russian people, rather than being demoralized by what was happening, said, we have no choice but to win. They stopped viewing this as a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. They said, this is a war between Russia and the collective West. It's a war that Russia can't lose. So the Russian people started supporting this war wholeheartedly. And we also saw the Russian government make a transition from, hey, we're hoping for this peace deal to, all right, we got to fight a long time war here. Start mobilizing defense industry, start getting our production up to speed, get ready for a protracted conflict against the collective West. And so the fall of 2022, we have this happening, all the while knowing that the NATO is now rebuilding yet another Ukrainian army. People understand Russia crushed the initial Ukrainian armed forces, beat them. They were rebuilt and Russia beat them. Now they're being rebuilt again for this counteroffensive that everybody's talking about, that Zaluzhny actually telegraphed. He said exactly where they're going to attack, in what direction, with what number of forces. And the Russians went, thank you very much. We'll prepare for that. And the Russians beat them. But that happened. Now, this is happening in, we see this projection taking place in the fall of 2022, early 2023. Meanwhile, what's happening there is something that nobody expected, because while the Ukrainians were taking Kharkov, while they took the right bank of Kherson, there were still offenses taking place that began actually in the May-June 2022 timeframe, after the betrayal of the Ukrainians in the West became known, to push in the Lugansk and Donetsk area. One of the units that was responsible for this was the Wagner Group. And we started seeing Wagner having successes on the battlefield. But at the same time these successes were happening, something political was happening, which is the Russian government said, all right, if Ukraine wants to play this game, they want long-term war, then we have to do right by the Russian people in this region. So we're going to hold referendum, and we're going to say, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, you have a chance to join Russia. Vote for it. Well, they did. And they said, we want to be part of Russia, and they became part of Russia. Wagner Group is a private military contractor. It's a PMC. Russian law prohibits PMCs from operating on Russian soil. So while Wagner's carrying out very successive operations in May, June, July, August, September, pushing the Ukrainians back, come September, October, they became illegal overnight. It's like, you can't operate on Russian soil. Now, the Russians aren't stupid or cruel. The Russian Ministry of Defense said, we have a one-year contract from 1 May 2022 to 1 May 2023. We're going to let you continue to operate as Wagner. We're going to honor our contract. But on the 1st of May 2023, you have to transition over to contract service with the military of defense. That's what the law says. And Yevgeny Prigozhin, the director, the owner of Wagner, said, no, I got a cash cow here. I'm making a lot of money. I need this thing to continue. And how am I going to do that? He's going to play politics. And what I mean by that is he was advancing. He took Soledar. Soledar was a legitimate military objective. but next to Soledar is Bakhmut, heavily defended. The Russians are in, remember at this time, the Russians are saying, we need to hunker down, positional warfare while we build up capability. The last thing we need while we're mobilizing troops is a major battle. We don't want it. And Prigozhin said, I'm sort of the hero right now because we took Soledar. Let's go on to Bakhmut. And he committed the Russians to a battle that they weren't really positioned to fight. They weren't prepared. People talk about artillery starvation. It's not that the Ministry of Defense said, we're going to stop giving you ammunition. What happened is you took a force of 200,000 where you had ammunition that could be allocated in sufficient quantity to meet that needs. You expanded the frontage. You increased the number of troops. You have to build up reserves. So the ammunition has to be reallocated using a different formula. And Wagner stopped getting the allocation they used to get. And Prigozhin's throwing a fit. And plus the Ministry of Defense is saying, we didn't plan for this operation to begin with. Now you're compelling us to accompany you to protect your flanks, and we don't want to be there. That's not what we want to be doing. But Prigozhin engaged anyways to play political games. 1 May passed on. We're now into May, and Wagner's leading the front, waving the flag. Everybody's talking about the heroics of Wagner, but the Ministry of Defense is saying, yeah, when this is over, you're off the front lines. You're done. And Prigozhin said, that's not the outcome I want. So he starts criticizing Shoigu, Gerasimov, the Russian Ministry of Defense. So we have this crisis taking place. The Ukrainians look at this crisis taking place and they make the gamble that if they push back, if they reinforce, if they don't give up Bakhmut, they can grind the Russians down and create a political crisis amongst the Russians, a controversy, a lack of confidence on the Russian military. So they start pouring troops in, troops that should have been held in reserve for the great 2023 counteroffensive. And they ended up losing about 70,000 guys. That's a lot of people. So the counteroffensive that Zaluzhny is talking about was supposed to be about 160,000 men dedicated to this. 90,000 NATO was training, but 70,000 that they already had left over from before. But those 70,000 are no longer available because what Prigozhin did. So it turned out Prigozhin's folly turned out to benefit the Russians in the long term, but short term, it created a crisis that led to Prigozhin ultimately doing what he did, the attempted, whatever you want to call it, the betrayal of Putin, the betrayal of Russia, the end of Wagner. And so that's taking place, and that's very distracting to a lot of people who are focusing on this in the summer of I guess this would be 2023. Yeah. But at the same time this is happening, while this drama is playing out, the Ukrainians begin their counteroffensive in Zaporizhia, in the vicinity of Robotyno, and they commit. At that time, when I looked at it, I said this counteroffensive is doomed to fail. Yeah, it can never succeed. And not only that, then I started doing just basic military math, and I'm looking at saying, okay, the Ukrainians have all these forces up, but these forces, NATO had to really squeeze the tube to get Ukraine the forces that they wanted. It's not like NATO was sitting back with forces saying, okay, we'll send you a couple hundred more tanks. That was it. NATO's running around saying, where can we get Soviet-era tanks, replenish them? Let's get them some Leopards, but Leopards that work. How do we get? They got the stuff there, but there was nothing left. So I'm saying, okay, wait, NATO's depleted. And then the big thing was artillery. I'm going, where's the ammunition? NATO itself said, we don't have any ammunition. I've said, okay, let's go through basic artillery expenditure rates to support a counteroffensive, the scope and scale of the one the Ukrainians are getting ready to wreck. And what I said, when I looked at that, I said, the Ukrainians are going to deplete their combat capacity sometime by the end of summer, early fall. And at that point in time, the Ukrainian army is going to go into a status of collapse. And that's what I said. Now, I didn't say that Ukraine is going to surrender in the fall of 2023. I said that the Ukrainian army will cease possessing the combat cohesion necessary to sustain offensive operations, and that the Russians will have turned the table and will have achieved the strategic initiative, and we are beginning the process of attrition that will lead to the collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces. That's exactly what happened. Now, collapse takes a long time. I made a point the whole time to say, to bring up Kursk. I don't know how many times I had to mention the Battle of Kursk throughout the summer of 2023 and into the fall. I said, Kursk, this is the equivalent of Kursk. The Germans threw everything they had left in the Battle of Kursk, and they lost. It got ground down. They began the collapse of the German ability to sustain combat. But Kursk took place in August of 1943. I think the battle ended there, late July, August.
Yeah, August.
Yeah, the last time I checked, the Germans didn't surrender in Berlin until May of 1945. So collapse can take a long time. I liken it to, let's say I have a bridge here in the United States. We have infrastructure problems. And I go and I look at the bridge and I see that chunks of concrete are falling off the bridge. My bridge now has problems. Can that column that's losing concrete maintain the integrity necessary to support this structure? And I could simply say that if the deterioration of the columns continue at this rate, the bridge will collapse. But some people will say, well, Scott, the bridge isn't collapsing. Trucks are going over the bridge. Clearly, you're wrong. No, I'm not. The concrete keeps falling. You're not doing anything to repair it. Now the metal has been exposed to the elements. It's rusting, further weakening. The collapse is further. It's going to collapse. But Scott, the trucks are still going over it. It hasn't collapsed. You're wrong. And I'm saying, no, I'm not, because the collapse is inevitable at this point in time. You can't reverse it. At some point in time, the level of structural loss of integrity on that bridge is such that nothing can save the bridge. What you should do is stop all traffic, blow the bridge up, and build a new bridge. But if you continue to run trucks across, eventually that bridge is going to collapse and the trucks are coming down with it. That's where we are today, right now in Ukraine. The bridge is collapsing as we speak. The trucks are coming down. All the people that said Scott called it too soon, I didn't. I said it was collapsing. But the total collapse, the physical collapse, takes time. But once the bridge reaches a certain point of decay, the collapse is inevitable. Mm-hmm. Point of irreversible decay was reached in the fall of 2023 at the end of the counteroffensive, because at that point in time, Ukraine burned through all the reserves, all the resources that it needed to launch to maintain a stable defensive posture. They burned it out. There were no new troops coming through the pipeline. There was no new equipment coming through the pipeline. Ukraine was burning through resources at a rate far greater than that could be replenished, while Russia, on the other hand, was accumulating resources at a far greater rate than they were being deplenished on the battlefield. The outcome was absolute. The only thing you couldn't say for certain is, what's the time frame? But you know what the outcome is: total collapse. It's happening as we speak.
Yeah, buckling started. You can see how the front line is buckling, and eventually, it's not question yes or no, just when.
Yeah.
So it's going to happen. It's simply going to happen. And regarding to that spring and summer offensive, NATO HQ they perform analysis. They perform the games, simulations, how to do that. And I'm quite surprised that they didn't have anybody who can really step on the brake and explain that it's not going to work on that way. So it's not lost only battle only for Ukraine. It is a lost battle for NATO as a major sponsor.
Yeah, I think what happened there was we know from press reports that NATO used the Cora wargaming program. And if you study Cora, you can look at it. It's online. I want to point out to the audience that is not Maverick. All right. So Maverick is innocent. Yeah. But the point is, NATO war gamed this out. And there's different modules in the war game. The air superiority module, which is a requirement of,
and they didn't have it.
They didn't have it. And you cannot breach a fortified position without it.
Absolutely.
Right off the bat, you're going, well, guys, you're going to lose. And then you have the artillery thing. No matter how much ammunition you provided, you weren't going to get the artillery supremacy necessary. You could get artillery parity on occasion, temporary superiority, but not sustained superiority. So anybody would look at it and go, nah. Now, I used to do a war game. We didn't have the Cora program. We had something called Janus. But what I remember in designing the Marine Corps assault on the fortified positions of Iraq, back in October of 1990 is when we first ran the program, we weren't getting the results that the commanders wanted, because no commander wanted to be told all your Marines are dead. They're like, Scott, that's not the answer we want. We need the Marines have breached the lines and we're moving on to Kuwait City.
Exploit the
3 days. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so we have to go back and we have to start game. Now you can game the system artificially or you can game it realistically. So we looked at a couple of things. One, did we have a true picture of Iraqi capabilities? Were we overselling Iraqi defensive capabilities? And the other one is, are we giving the Marines the resources necessary to degrade the Iraqis in the time frame needed? And what we figured out is that we were giving the Iraqis too much capability. So we realistically recalibrated the Iraqis. And then we said we have to give the Marines more capacity to bring the Iraqis down. And we started doing that, but we did it realistically, honestly. And in the end, we got the result, and we took it to General Boomer, and we said, this is what has to happen if you're going to get the breach. And he said, okay. And then he went and built a plan around that. And guess what? We breached. We were in Kuwait City 3 days. It worked out exactly the way we wanted, but we were realistic about it. What we didn't do is say, let's just have the Iraqis retreat out of the blue. So we attack, the Iraqis retreat. Well, that's what the NATO planners did. They said, we're going to attack at the juncture of, I think it was the 70th Regiment and the 291st Regiment of the 42nd Motorized Rifle Division.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I think.
Why these two? Well, both of these regiments suffered some casualties in 2022 fighting, and they lost commanders. They suffered casualties, and they had been put in a soft spot of the line, and then they were reinforced with mobilized troops. And so the working assumption was, oh, the mobilizers they don't want to be there. So the second we put pressure on, they're going to retreat. And the survivors, the initial survivors, are all demoralized. So all we have to do is hit them with a little bit of artillery, put an M2 Bradley and a Leopard up there, and they're going to retreat. So we assume that this seam is going to collapse, and we will then exploit that seam, get in the rear, and it's all she wrote. And everybody went, but what about air superiority? Don't worry about air power. We don't need it. The Russians are going to retreat automatically. The game says so. We programmed it. We came, they retreated, dropped the holes there. We went through it. Wow. But what about don't worry about it. The Russians are going to retreat. And so they convinced everybody that that's what was going to happen. Turned out that the 70th and 291st were pretty damn good units, that the mobilized troops there wanted to be there, were ready to fight. And they did fight, and they fought very well. They very hard, and they won the battle. That's the reality. Cora failed because it was an artificial gaming of the situation. And this is where NATO failed, because NATO knew that this was going to be the outcome. You can't be a professional soldier. You can't be a professional soldier and pretend that so here's the thing. What did NATO want from this offensive then? Because they knew it wasn't going to achieve what it wanted, wasn't even going to come close to achieving. I mean, maybe NATO thought that that if you put enough troops in there, you might get the Tokmak. You might get the Tokmak, but you can't sustain that position. You'll get pushed back. But anybody realistic would say, no, you're just going to get burned out right there in the front line. You're not going anywhere on this one. And yet they allowed it to go forward. And not only that, when the Ukrainians went forward and got whipped and came back, NATO said, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, knowing what the outcome would be. Why? Yeah. And that's a question that, is open to speculation. I believe because they thought that the casualty rate of the Russians was going to be higher than what it was. I think they believed that the price Russia would pay in defeating the Ukrainians was going to be so high that it would be demoralizing for the Russian military, because they were playing off this is why I spent so much time with Prigozhin. They were playing off of the perception they were getting in April, May, June of dissent in the Russian ranks. They were playing off the fact that the Russians were questioning the leadership of Shoigu and Gerasimov. So they believed that if they could put pressure on the Russians in the Zaporizhia front, that the Russians would sustain casualties, not war-losing casualties, but casualties would get commanders on the front to say, our guys are incompetent. This war is unwinnable. And now you begin the process of political decay at home in the rear. And now you have the Moscow Maidan moment, etc. So they were looking for a political solution to the military problem. A total misread of the situation, total misread, a bad move on their part. But that's a political decision. I mean, the military guys, I think, were very honest. We ain't going to win this one, guys. And I think the politicians said, it doesn't matter. Can you kill a lot of Russians? And they said, yeah, we think we can. But they couldn't, because the Russians didn't do what they expected. The Russians didn't fight for they wanted two things to happen. Either the Russians would fight and die in place, or the Russians would withdraw precipitously, a la Kharkov. Remember in the summer of 22, where they pulled back? And they said, if they pull back, we can exploit that aggressively and kill a lot of them before they stop us. And if they stay in place, we can bring artillery down and kill them. What they didn't expect is a guy named Colonel General Alexander Romanchuk to come in and redesign a whole new Russian defensive doctrine based upon flexible defense. What they didn't expect is that they'd hit, the Russians would hit them, stop them, pull back, suck them in, hit them, pull back, suck them in, counterattack, and kill everybody. And the Russians are suffering very few casualties in comparison. I expected it. Why? Because I read Romanchuk's paper. I mean, it wasn't secret. The guy published a paper in March of 2023. The paper that he wrote while he was taken out as the deputy commander of the 58th Combined Arms Army. He participated in the initial operations, was taken to the Combined Arms Academy for the purpose of consolidating lessons learned to write this new defensive doctrine. And then he did everybody a favor and published it in an unclassified journal. And all you had to do is read it and say, whoa. And then you realize, hey, they pulled this guy out of the academy after he published his paper, and they put him in command. Where Zaluzhny said they were going to attack. Zaluzhny said, we are going straight to Melitopol, the shortest line possible. Robotino, Tokmak, Melitopol. And they said, Romanchuk, you're in charge. And he designed the defense the way he planned it, and they slaughtered the Ukrainians. It was an inevitable outcome. But again, I knew this. I knew all of this in June. Every NATO commander knew this as well. There's a problem. There's a disconnect between NATO military and the political people. There's still so many people who have been poisoned by the Michael McFalls of the world and others that believe that Putin is in a precarious place politically, that there is a viable opposition waiting to rise up to remove him. Why? Because Prigozhin operated under that assumption. Remember, he drove on Moscow believing that people were going to step up and support him, that there was a class of Russian oligarchs, of businessmen, of military officers who would betray their oath of loyalty to Russia and rise up to insist that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, get rid of Shoigu, get rid of Gerasimov. And why did Prigozhin want those two to be getting rid of? Not because they were bad. Look, Shoigu will go down in history as a genius. Yes. He's the man that got Russian defense industry to do what it's doing today. That's his job. He's not a battlefield dude. He's not the guy.
He's not a general.
His job was to organize Russian defense industry, and he did. And it crushed the West. Today, the West has no clue how to respond to what Shoigu did. Yeah. Gerasimov's job was to build an army out of, to mobilize, build an army, stabilize the battlefield, and then engage in a war of attrition that allowed Russia to go where it's doing. He's a genius too. Prigozhin, I think the people that say it best, I've talked to a couple people, I'll leave their names out of it because, just to respect it, but very high placed people and who know Prigozhin personally. They said, look, what he did in the summer of 2022, in the fall of 2020, in the fall of 2022, all the way up till the end of 22, early 2023, he deserves all the credit in the world. Wagner was a very capable force, and it developed a certain reputation. Maybe the reputation was TikTok in nature, self-promotion. But at the end of the day, Wagner won battles. Yeah. And that was a reality, and they had respect. The Chechens respected Wagner. I'll tell you that right now. The Chechens respected Wagner. They thought they were very, but then he said Prigozhin lost sight of what the objective was. The objective wasn't to enrich Prigozhin. The objective was for Russia to win this war. Yeah. And Prigozhin lost that. He got greedy. He wanted to make money. He viewed Wagner as a money-making machine. and he lost perspective. And then that was that. But what Prigozhin did in during that time is create political uncertainty. And the political analysts in the West took a look at that and misread it. They misread it grossly, and they said there is a problem in Russia. Putin is not a strong leader. Maybe Shoigu doesn't have the support of the military. Maybe Gerasimov is hated by the military. If we can launch this counteroffensive and generate casualty rates that shock the Russian public, maybe we can generate in the summer of 2023 what Prigozhin was trying to generate in June of 2023. And that's where I think the strategic failure was, that there were people who actually believed that Putin was weak. Anybody who was traveling at that time, I mean, gosh, where was I in May 2023? Oh, yeah, I was in Russia. And I will tell you right now, there was no doubt in my mind who was in charge in Russia. There was no doubt in my mind the support that Vladimir Putin had. I was in Moscow on Victory Day. I got to see the rehearsal of the parade. I was there when the drone hit the Kremlin. I saw the impact it had on the Russian people. They weren't panicked. They were furious. They were angry. And there wasn't anybody saying, oh my God, we don't trust our leader. They were all saying, let's get it done. Let's get it done. He's the man to get it done. Total misread. Now, the U.S. Embassy has military attachés who are more experienced than I am, or should be. Why aren't they saying? Why aren't they? Because we no longer have a military, we no longer an intelligence community capable of doing honest assessments. The entire system has been politicized. If you dare write an assessment that deviates from the political direction, so the military attaché's job isn't to write something that sends it up saying, hey, boss, your policy is going to fail. That was my job back when I was in the military. My job wasn't to tell my boss what he or she wanted to hear. No, you're a failure if you do that. You're a bad intelligence officer. My job was to put the hard facts on the table and say, this is reality. Now, what are you going to do about it? It wasn't to tell them how to do things, but just say, this is reality. The reality is Putin is very, very strong, that nothing you're doing is going to undermine that. And that if you're counting on him being undermined, your policy is likely to fail. But no, today you don't get promoted if you do that. You can write that report one time and the general goes, thank you very much. Oh, by the way, you're being transferred to Alaska. Have a good career. And off you go. That's the way everything works right now in the United States. You're not allowed to run a red flag up the system anymore. If you do that, the red flag turns into the end of your career. And the end result is what happened here. A total misread of the military political situation that led to the needless sacrifice of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. And, and now we have this result where the Ukrainian army is collapsing. It's beyond repair. It can't be repaired. And the tragedy is this is the end of the Ukrainian nation as the world once saw it. Whether you're happy with that result or not, it doesn't matter. Ukraine will never be what it was, ever.
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, they can blame themselves for this. No, not ordinary people, but they're the one who get trapped into this masterfully executed trap by the West. Western money, Ukrainian blood, and as many of those senators and Congress.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've got 5 minutes left, and then I have to go.
So both sides.
I'm sorry. Then I have to interrupt this exciting conversation about the Ukraine. And Scott, I wanted then to ask your opinion first about today's news about Navalny. What do you think? What has happened there, and what is your view?
Because Navalny was unhealthy. He had bad health. We knew this. This isn't the first. That's the people calling me for the other interview, but I'll click them off for the minute. Navalny was unhealthy, and he had bad health. He was a criminal. He was convicted of corruption charges. The penalties that he accrued required him to be transferred to a different level of incarceration. And while he was incarcerated there, he had a heart attack and he died. He's a traitor to his people, a traitor to Russia. He was a CIA asset. Recruited by Michael McFaul, groomed by Michael McFaul while he was the ambassador, sent to Yale, where he received further instruction from the CIA, and was sent back to Russia for the purposes of undermining Vladimir Putin. As a human, I look, he's married, he has kids. So on behalf of his wife and his children, I wish he was alive. But he was never going to leave prison. He was a criminal. He had a period of incarceration that that meant he was going to die in prison, and he had betrayed his country. So there wasn't going to be a Russian government sympathetic enough to say, we're going to pardon you and let you out. You know, the Russians gave him a chance, you know, after the so-called poisoning. And again, I don't buy into that narrative, because Novichok is the most dangerous chemical on the face of the earth, and it should have killed him, but it didn't. He was sent to Europe, and he should have stayed in Europe. But instead he came back, not to, you know, support, he came back because he believed that, and his handlers believed that the trial, remember, these are the same people that thought that if you could inflict enough casualties on the Russians in Zaporizhia, that Putin would fall. So they believed that if Navalny went back and stood trial, that would generate so much controversy amongst the Russian people that it would weaken Vladimir Putin. It didn't, because Navalny has no support, never had support. He's a traitor. Every Russian that lives in Russia today recognizes him as a traitor, and he died a traitor's death in prison. And unfortunately, on that note, I do have to go, because
thanks a lot, Scott. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, and we'll talk again later. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Lena.
Cheers. Bye.
Okay, so we can now discuss maybe Navalny's case a bit more. Unfortunately, Scott is.
I mean, Navalny. He's. I agree with Scott. Absolutely. He was expendable for the West. They thought that they're going to make their men to topple Putin, but no. It wasn't possible. And as a human being, I'm really sorry for him and for his family. But it is what it is. So.
Yeah, and now you know what I find interesting. I was scrolling through Telegram and through the news, and now it turns out that West started blaming Russia immediately. That even Russian MPA spokesperson Maria Zakharova said, "Well, guys, you are accusing Russia even before the investigation results arrived, so maybe you have staged that." It is like that, and all the Russians are saying that. Well, all the Russians I've spoken to, like not all of them, but 90%, I have spoken to some 15 or 20 people, and people are convinced that it was the West who was behind assassination of Navalny. But
there is no coincidence. Yeah, there is no coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. It happened right on time when the Munich conference is ongoing, and when his wife, his widow now, was already in Munich. It's really hard stuff to believe that it's set up. I mean, they can always find somebody. Maybe he was liquidated, but not by the Russian government, because he was put in a prison, and there is no chance that he can make any political return. So he was politically dead. He couldn't do anything. But as a last step, as a last fight, that they can try to use that in the situation when. Basically, Avdiivka is lost. Ukrainian front is crumbling. There is a big problem with now with Carlson and Putin interview, because the effect that created, they're trying simply to make some kind of artificial problem.
Yeah,
and this is basically the perfect situation. It is how Western some of the Western services working. But for normal people, it's simply clear. As Scott said, he was sick, man. He was sick, man, and that stuff is happening. And those Russian colonies, penalty colonies, are not kindergartens. I mean, they're tough places. No, much better than it was during the Stalin time. But colony is colony, and prison is prison. And he was rightfully sentenced there for treason.
Yeah, and it can happen to anyone, because they got thrombus.
And if he was vaccinated, whatever, with one of those Pfizer stuff or whatever they put into people, I simply do. As I said, as a human being, I'm really sorry for him and for his family.
Yeah, so
rest in peace.
So we just have to wait for official results.
No, official response, but that official response, whatever is, it will be disregarded on the West. So that story will simply continue. They will talk and talk and talk. But everyone there lasts for 3 days. So in 3 days, nobody will talk about Navalny. His wife, his widow, she's already somewhere else with somebody else. So yeah, everybody wanted for 3 days. So that's it. They lost
because as Scott said, and I can confirm that, I have like lots of friends in Russia, and I read through Russian news, and Navalny wasn't even close to being opponent for Putin. He wasn't popular. He was like, and he is like, it is maybe terrible to tell that, but he is more profitable, well, for the so-called opposition to have him dead than to keep him alive, because when he was alive, people started forgetting about him.
Yeah, I mean, now
no matter how hard he tried, then unfortunately it ended not very well for him.
Yeah, I mean, he played his last role, and that role will be played for a little bit more, and after that he was simply going to disappear there from news, because something else will pop up. I'm sure that pretty sure that every Western media, mainstream media, they will talk about this for a few days. And after that, his name is simply going to disappear from the news.
Yeah, because as I have already said, they started accusing like Kremlin immediately, but Kremlin has no interest in his death.
No.
It is not they who are the beneficiaries of what happened.
Yeah, just look who can benefit from that. It's always follow the money and look who can benefit.
Yeah, that's true. That's
he's simply a marginal figure in Russia, but here on the West, they're trying to exploit it. Sometimes they have somebody skilled to do that, but more and more, it's simply like a pretty childish or even charlatan way how to exploit these kinds of events.
And that is sad, of course, because he has children and he has like a wife left, and of course losing close one is
it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for his family, definitely.
Yeah. So okay, I think we will be finishing for today. It was really great day.
It's excellent.
And it lasted a bit more than we planned, but it was very interesting, and I'm really glad that we had that full insight on what happened in Ukraine, because people constantly keep on asking, oh, why you predicted this and now it didn't happen like this, and